So this month, the organization Children's Health Defense, led by the lawyer Mary Holland, submitted what is called a citizen petition to the FDA. The petition is asking the FDA to revoke all biologics license application approvals, and that's abbreviated BLA, for the Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 so-called vaccines and revert them back to their previous status, which was an emergency use status. So I have Sasha Latypova here to discuss this petition and the arguments in this petition. It's a really, well, first of all, welcome, Sasha. Really happy you can join me for this. And Sasha has already talked in other interviews about the citizen petition. But I think because it's such an important petition, it's really worthwhile to go into the petition itself and look at the arguments.
Yes.
The petition is very well written. It's very well researched. It's long. It's like, 30 pages long or something like that?
34, 5 pages.
So with, I don't know how many, dozens, hundreds of links.
Hundreds of citations, yeah.
Yes, lots of citations. It must have taken a ton of time and work to put this together.
Yeah.
And Sasha is the person who really wrote most of this petition. Is that correct, Sasha?
Right. I collaborated. So the petition is based primarily on my research. So yes, it took a lot of work. It took several years for me to assemble this research and figure out exactly what was done and how this fraud was pulled on the public, collect all the information, plus a lot of FOIA materials became available. And so I'm basing it on disclosures that became available to the public. And yes, I was approached, I've known CHD and we talked about it several times. And I was urging anyone who would hear to push the FDA, push HHS for honest disclosure about the status of these shots. And because, of course, there's this whole big fight going on between, they calling us anti-vaxxers and unreasonable, and that we're going to take the precious vaccines away. And also RFK Jr. made a promise on the campaign trail that he's not taking vaccines away from those people who want it. So in this case, what's the next best thing? Well, the next best thing to do, if you can't remove them from market for whatever reason, because people are clamoring for them, then you should just give proper disclosure. Just label it correctly as the U.S. law requires. And this petition is what the result of this. We got together, myself and colleagues from CHD, Ray Flores was also one of the primary authors from the legal perspective, and compiled this petition to ask the FDA to either revoke the BLA licenses. This can result in complete removal of the vaccines from the market, or alternatively, if there's such a huge demand for them, then you should just properly label them as EUA and give people the proper disclosure that the law requires, which is it's a EUA countermeasure. It's not a medical product. Safety and efficacy isn't applicable. And you're waiving your constitutional rights if you're receiving it. So that would be, in my opinion of CHD, an honest thing to do.
So tell me first, Sasha, a few basic things, because not everybody is familiar with this legal instrument that we have, a citizen's petition. And if I understand it correctly, that is just kind of one of the tools that citizens of the United States have to address grievances to their government.
Yeah, so I wasn't also familiar with this method before, and thanks to CHD colleagues who figured this out. But it's a formal mechanism to ask FDA to point to some incorrect actions that they're making and ask them to correct their actions. And also, as part of it, we're collecting public commentary in a very proper way and comprehensive way. So this creates a docket. So it's not like a political petition. Sometimes people confuse it with political petitions, which just collect signatures for certain, vote yes, vote no, do this or that. But this is not one of those things. It's not just collecting signatures. And it creates a docket, and if FDA has about 180 days to respond to this petition, it's posted on regulations.gov. And if they don't respond or they don't do anything about it, then this can be ultimately transformed into a lawsuit, and all of the commentary that comes with it kind of becomes part of the package.
Right. And so you said, or you wrote on your Substack, that it received an enormous number of comments, like 100,000, over 100,000 after the first 24 hours. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were shocked, frankly. I mean, yes, we spent, so CHD did outreach. I did personal outreach, spent, several days emailing people, asking them to submit comments. Of course, I published it on my Substack and asked my subscribers to submit comments. We were frankly shocked by by how many comments we received in one day. In one day, it posted something like over 100,000 comments. On the second day that it was there in the system, we already had over 100,000 comments. Now it's something close to 103,000 comments. And the FDA is required to review the comments and then publicly post them. So right now there's 103,000 comments in the queue, showing on the counter of the regulations.gov, and of which about 1,700 were publicly posted. So processed by the staff, the data management staff, and publicly posted. And I'm estimating that at this rate, it will take them about 5 months to process all these comments and post.
Oh my God.
And it is an all-time record for public engagement on regulations.gov. And also people need to appreciate that the previous all-time record, which was a petition to label GMO foods, actually kind of similar in nature, right? Just label it. So just label it, give us proper disclosure. So that petition accumulated, they were using at the time form letters. It's no longer allowed. So like at that time they were using form letters and people just signing and the same text gets posted. So that's no longer allowed. So we were using just no tools. Also that GMO petition used 450 partner organizations to drive traffic to submit comments. So they submitted something like 1 million comments, of which most were form text, and they were compressed into something like 100 or 200,000 ultimately comments. And so we already beat that just in one day without all of this, digital tools, form letters, 400 partner organizations. So
it's amazing.
It's unbelievably amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing because these I looked up these citizen petitions, and often they are about some arcane stuff that very few people even know about and care about. Some industry, whether something should be generic or whatever. It's just like arcane things.
Yeah, they are arcane. They're usually like used for regulatory, like pushing FDA to like amend regulations in different ways. And typically they collect, I did research on this. A typical petition gets about 30 comments or less.
30. Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. So that gives you an idea. And I think the FDA received something like 150, 160 or something like that citizen petitions per year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's something they know how to deal with, but they're not used to something like this, a deluge of comments in the first 24 hours. And it's a bit weird. There are only an additional 3,000 in the following days, but maybe they haven't even really kept up with counting them.
It's hard to say. I also had a lot of reports from people saying the system kicks them out, although the comments are not closed technically, they're still open. And a bunch of people tried and could not submit. And I'm thinking it's probably because there's some so many that the IT systems may deem it as a denial of service attack.
Mm-hmm.
And prevent commentary. So it may be because of volume, people are not able to submit. I still urge people to submit, especially. So the important part about this is the comments can be up to 5,000 words and up to 200 megabytes attachment, which means that anybody. So I was urging colleagues who have data analysis that can be helpful here to submit their data analysis as part of it. So, write up a cover letter, attach your analysis, attach your evidence, write up for those who have injured or dead loved ones, submit your data, submit your story, your batch numbers, what happened, autopsy reports. You can do all sorts of things. You can append to this. And as I said, it can become a lawsuit eventually. So your data can eventually migrate to courts this way.
Yeah, exactly. So you said that they used to have forms that you could just sign, which made it much easier to collect a huge number of comments. That is no longer allowed, so they make it more difficult. There is a field on that when you go to leave a comment, you have to fill in. It's a mandatory field where you have to leave some sort of text. So, but And that is a huge barrier because, oh God, what am I going to write? But it's not really, you can just write one very simple sentence, to those in the audience who haven't done it yet. You don't have to write a novel or submit something really complicated, or no. You just have to say, I support the petition of CHD to revoke the BLA licenses for the shots. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. And that is, that's all you have to do. It doesn't take long.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Another thing, you don't have to be a U.S. citizen to submit a comment. And also, you can submit anonymously.
Yes, right. You can submit. And that also makes sense that you don't have to be a citizen because pretty much everybody in the world got injected with these poisons.
Yeah.
So they should have a say. They should be able to comment. Now, the other basic thing I wanted to get out of the way is, what are biologics? A lot of people don't know that. I remember, I don't know, when I had my first interview with you, Sasha, you talked about biologics and said, well, wait, stop. What are biologics? Now I think, my God, you never knew what biologics were. But a lot of people don't know. And, what are biologics?
Well, it's a whole Pandora's box, that definition alone. Biologics is so in general, FDA regulations are divided into two major or three. So food, and then within medicines, it's drugs, biologics, and devices. Now, so drugs are devices, you understand, medical devices. But what is drug versus a biologic? And it was before there was a clear division. Now it's merging, and it's very dangerous. So biologics were basically classified anything that's kind of nature derived. And in fact, biologics precede drugs regulation by decades. The Biologics Virus and Toxin Act was somewhere, I maybe not getting the year exactly right, but was somewhere around 1905 when it was introduced, Virus and Toxin Act. And so that became the first sort of regulatory foundation of biologics. And the FDA itself was formed only in 39 or 40. So 1939 or 40. So it wasn't regulated there was no FDA at the time. The US government introduced this Virus Toxin Act and regulation of biologics ostensibly in response to adulterated insulin. Some deaths resulted from adulterated insulin used at the time. And so they said, well, we need to regulate the purity and licensing of the facilities that can process biologics. So anything nature-derived, such as blood for transfusions, for example, cellular assays or cell lines that are used in research, tissues for transplantation or for growing cultures and stuff like that. So all of those materials derived from bacteria, bacterial strains, so materials derived from bacteria, all of that falls, was at the time kind of put into this biologics category. And they still are regulated as biologics, these things. Then over time, all of this migrated when molecular biology came on the scene, which is, I don't know, 50s, 60s or so, the beginning of it. Then they started claiming a whole bunch of things under biologics. And today, the division is becoming blurrier and blurrier. And actually, this is part of the issue with these mRNA shots. They're called biologics, but they're actually chemical drugs, 100% chemical drugs. They're not biologics. But now they've, when I was working in the industry, the working definition or division between drugs and biologics was the molecular size. So they were saying drug is anything below 900 kilodaltons of molecular weight, so small molecule. And biologics is something in excess of that, thousands of kilodaltons. And the issue, and typically what happens is if it's a small molecule drug, you can formulate it as a pill. If it's a very large molecule, like in excess of thousands kilodaltons of molecular weight, you can't formulate it as a pill because if you ingest it, your body will just break it down and it won't stay in the chemical composition, and so it will be just degraded and digested. So typically those things are delivered through injections. And over time, again, as I said, with molecular biology, so they started kind of hybridizing. They would start something from cellular line, and then, like traditional vaccines were grown in chicken embryos. So it's a bunch of chemicals thrown into chicken embryo, and then it grows. And now these monstrosities that they make are almost entirely synthesis of chemicals and cocktails of chemicals. And I actually even published the ingredients that go into synthesizing something like synthetic DNA and RNA. And it's horrifying. It contains explosives, corrosives, chemicals, hugely toxic chemicals. They are produced by, a lot of it is produced by what was formerly plants to make film, like Fujifilm and Kodak, because they're chemicals.
Wow.
So it's horrifying. Like if you look at the list of the ingredients, it has nothing to do with life, and it's incompatible with life. Yet they're claiming they're making this synthetic molecular building blocks of life out of this chemical sludge. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. So yes, it's huge chemical. They do have some biological processes involved, such as at the beginning. So when they synthesize oligonucleotides first using very, very toxic, corrosive, explosive, dangerous chemicals, then these oligonucleotides get thrown into a vat of E. coli cells. And that's the only biological process that's involved here. So the chemical sludge gets thrown into literal shit, E. coli, into a vat, and it picks it up and it grows and makes more of it. And then so they call it, we've grown DNA now. It also includes, they code genes for antibiotic resistance into this. And so now we have and so to kill E. coli, they use antibiotics. So that's why they have genes for antibiotic resistance, so that this chemical substance survives the the killing of the E. coli cells with antibiotics. And of course, everything that goes into the manufacture of this, all the in-process chemicals and all the raw materials eventually end up in the final product. So in some trace amounts or larger amounts or contaminants or whatever. So E. coli is there, the toxins are there, antibiotics are there, antibiotic resistance genes are there. Ethanol, they use ethanol. So ethanol is there, so you get injected with ethanol. And so all of this ends up in the final product, and they call it biologic. They call it like nature made it. It's
Yes.
the most ridiculous thing on earth that I've ever heard.
Yes. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Go on.
But that's just like a very long story discussing the differences, because the differences originally were very clear. Now they're not clear at all. And in fact, like as I'm saying, what they call biologics today is actually almost 100% chemicals.
Wow, that's very interesting. This blurring between biologics and non-biologic drugs. Very interesting. It just occurred to me now that the mRNA COVID shots have this BLA approval. You could ask your doctor to see the package insert, right? To see what's in it. I mean,
well, yes,
it's no longer blank.
Yeah, well, so today they ship them under BLA, biologics license approved labels. So it means fully FDA approved. And they have names, brand names, Comirnaty and Spikevax or mNext Spike now on the cartons. And they also have inserts that have the approved, so-called approved FDA label. You can also look it up online. They're posted on FDA website, and they should be posted on manufacturer's website as well, those labels. So there is an insert. There is ostensibly a label on it saying how many milligrams, micrograms of what it's supposed to be there. But what the listings of these things are, they mean nothing. So I'm just saying by memory, but they say there's active ingredient. It says modified RNA. What is it?
Modified RNA.
Yeah,
so that doesn't tell you anything.
Ingredient. And there are lipid nanoparticle, like 4 components that go into the lipid nanoparticle. 2 of them are proprietary. So it says A, C, B, blah, 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 something. What is it? Nobody knows. It's proprietary. And then there are 2 components that are ostensibly have been characterized and unknown, the cholesterol and one other lipid component. And then there are some ingredients that are considered like buffer, so water, sucrose, and so those are more or less known. But again, as I said, the main ingredients are just names. Like nobody knows really what is in them, what's contained in them. And when, remember, I've been reporting on this for quite some time. There was thousands of tests independently done from the field. So people who could get hold of files and whatever lab equipment they had access to did various types of characterizations of these things. And absolutely everything under the sun has been found in them, especially a lot of metals, a lot of toxic metals, some radioactive materials. There were obviously the DNA, the whole big story about the DNA so-called contamination. And that's from the part of the process I was discussing, when they're making DNA first, grow it in a vat, and then they use chemical reaction to transform it into RNA, kind of similar to film negative to positive. And from that, the DNA is not removed. That becomes, it's an in process,
right?
In process,
which they should do. It should be removed.
They in principle should completely remove, but they don't. And so that's been found. The RNA that was found there, when it was found and somebody had access to tools to characterize it, is completely not to spec. There hasn't been, in fact, I am not aware of a single vial test like this. And as I said, there were thousands. I'm not aware of single vial test that actually produced something close to the label.
Wow. Not a single one that produced something close to the label. That is very comforting to know. Oh, wow. So in any case, we have this BLA, we have this biologic approval, biologic license application. That's actually what it stands for, Biologics License Approval process that these biologics go through. And then for drugs that are smaller, that are below this weight that you described earlier, there is the NDA, right? The new drug application.
New drug application and approval. Yeah, it's NDA versus BLA. And BLA is, as I said, it's so my colleague Catherine Watt wrote quite a lot about it. So as I said, BLA actually regulation precedes even the formation of the FDA. And so that Virus Toxin Act has always been used. So Catherine called this process as leapfrogging. Whenever the new regulation was introduced for drugs, so there was a Public Health Services Act, Food and Drugs and Cosmetics Act, formation of the FDA, all of those relevant steps, and they took to regulate drugs, they always carved out biologics. So I forget the sequence of events, but let's say in the 40s, they introduced an act saying we're going to regulate drugs such and such. And in that legislation, they would say, this does not apply to the things that are under Virus Toxin Act. And when they would so every time a new drug regulation came out, they would say this doesn't apply to the Virus Toxin Act. And Virus Toxin Act from 1905 is extremely limited. It only licenses the facility. It doesn't say anything about the composition. The most critical part is there is so drugs are regulated based on the composition of matter. Composition of matter is actually, you have to disclose the chemical process, chemical molecule, and the exact synthesis steps to make that chemical molecule. And then, then you also have tests to characterize that you actually made what you said you were going to make. So that's the intellectual property that governs. It's called composition of matter because it's knowable, it's definitive. With the small chemicals, it's definitive what is in it and not in it and how you make it. With biologics, you cannot do that. And for a long time, that was true. When they were biologics, that's true, because you can't, even if you can tell me what's in, I was telling somebody an example of this. So I have this high quality, very expensive Cabernet from Napa Valley, right? You can chemically characterize it to some extent, but you can't fully characterize it. Otherwise, you would be able to synthetically make it, and you don't need a very expensive vineyard and a lot of labor and a lot of, expensive facilities and a long period of time, like 18 months, 24 months, and then 5 years to age it. So you don't need any of that. Now you can make it synthetically, right? If you fully knew how to characterize, and wine is a biological product. And so if you knew how to do it, you would have done it, but you don't. And so that's true about nature. We can't make synthetic anything. Nothing can be made synthetically. Those claims about synthetic DNA are hoaxes. Scientifically, they're hoaxes. And so, because if you could make synthetic DNA, you could synthetically make an apple. You could synthetically make me a bottle of Opus One, which is sold today for over $1,000 a bottle. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be amazing business? But you can't. And so that's where we are. With biologics, you cannot characterize them as composition of matter, with true biologics, with true biology. And there are some approximations and models that can be made, but you can't. So it's not knowable. And that's why Virus Toxin Act, they understood, well, at the time there was no really, chemistry was quite evolved, but there was not really good ways of characterizing stuff. And they just said, well, yeah, this is not characterizable, so we're just going to license the facility to be clean, essentially. So that was like the extent of the regulation. So it's the facility that government somehow, audited, verified that they are producing things in a clean manner, just like with food, like with the brewery, a winery, or a bakery or something. You license them just based on principles of hygiene. And that's how these biologics were always licensed. But as I said, as we merged with this, molecular biology methods, synthetic methods, which are all actually chemicals, but they're using the same historical laws, the same historical category to absolve themselves practically from any regulation.
Wow, that's fascinating, Sasha. That's really fascinating. So what you're actually telling me is that it is impossible for biologics, like real biologics, as you said, not these ones that kind of are no longer biologics or have hardly any biologics in them. So that it is impossible for these real biologics to actually tell what exactly is in them, every single thing. And you have to know that in order, as you know, for aspirin or any other drug, you know exactly what's in there, and you have to, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to manufacture millions of these pills and make sure that every single pill contains exactly the same things. And that is key for, for safety of drugs. So, but you're telling me that it was never possible, and it will never be possible, because we are dealing with nature here, and we don't really understand it. And it's kind of always different. And whatever happens there, we don't really understand any of it. We just throw it all together and hope for the best. And that the batches are different. And that's why you end up with all these different batches. And that's why they needed to have carve-outs for every single thing, because they would not have been able to comply with any of these new tests and rules and regulations, etc. Correct?
Correct. Yeah. So the things that they were introducing as regulations for drugs is just not possible to actually do. Initially, I could say it made sense, this kind of carving out, as I said, because those things are kind of inapplicable. A bunch of tests that are required for, let's say, toxicology assessment of drugs, they're practically not possible with these biological compounds, biological matter, because it gets digested in the system, and it's indistinguishable from other, our digestive process and materials. So initially that made sense before, let's say, 50s, but after 50s, it becomes, and they started using it as a just mechanism of getting away from regulations. And especially, I would say, when I started working in the industry, throughout that time, biologics, these kind of biologic drugs. So there's now a category that's kind of a hybrid in the FDA. It's called biologic drugs. And at that time, it was a very tiny category, and we didn't quite pay attention to it because it was always kind of in the corner of the industry where very, very severe conditions like terminal cancer or Huntington's disease or some other like really terminal conditions were being treated or attempted to treat. And, they're very small. The regulation was light there because, well, these people are dying and, they have no options. And so also these products are so toxic that they could not be given to healthy volunteers in clinical trials. It was unethical to give them to healthy volunteers. So we never paid attention to it very much. I was on the safety side. I was on the early safety, which is all primarily healthy volunteers. And we were like, it's nothing to worry about. But now it's overwhelming part of the entire pharmaceutical industry. All pharma companies have migrated to biologics because FDA made it so convenient for them. So FDA says on this side, on the drug side, you have to comply with all these regulations, and they throw a book at you. On the biologics side, oh, look, this is very light. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do any of this. And also the market exclusivity you can get on the drug side is 5 years. On the biologic side is 12 years. And for the long time, they also didn't have what's called biosimilar, which is like the drugs go generic, drugs patents expire and they go generic. So
Right.
on the biologic side, that didn't exist for a long time. It now exists, but it's also very difficult to do because these processes are not reproducible. And surprise, surprise, there is no biosimilar pathway for vaccines. So vaccines became such an attractive space for pharma. And I assert that this is now part of the premeditated strategy of the US government. But let's put that aside. Even if you don't believe in this conspiracy, just by the matter of such different regulations and frameworks being applied to these two things, the biologics and especially vaccines become extremely attractive for investors, for pharma companies, for anyone, because here you don't have to comply with anything. You get a monopoly and nobody can ever compete with you. So,
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. All right. So good. So we have established some firm ground here. And now let's go into the into the citizen petition itself. One last question. When did Moderna and Pfizer get these approvals? The BLA.
So the BLAs were issued in 21. So do you remember they first went on the market starting in December 2020 as emergency use authorized products. And then nobody was explained what that meant, EUA. And myself, well, all the professionals, including myself, were kind of confused about it for a long time. I only realized the significance of EUA. I'll tell why, but I only realized later on what the significance was. Now we know it's EUA is a countermeasure. So now we know everything about it. So they went on the market as EUA countermeasures in December 2020. In August, I believe in August 2021, Peter Marks issued full BLA approval for Pfizer and then shortly afterwards for Moderna.
Yeah, I think it was a few months later for Moderna. So that means August 2021 is that's almost 4.5 years ago.
Yes, and
that's a long time ago.
Yeah, and they've been claiming it's fully approved. And also you remember that when they issued that full BLA by Peter Marks, they continued shipping EUA versions for a very long time.
Yes, correct.
I believe the Comirnaty labeled product became available sometime in early 2023. Or at least there was an announcement. I couldn't find exactly when they started shipping it, but there was an announcement posted that you can order Comirnaty, and that was sometime in January 2023.
Yes. Yeah, it took a very long time. As you said, more than a year. It was nobody really understood back then why it was that Comirnaty was used in Europe, for example. Some states there got Comirnaty pretty much immediately. And here in the United States, it took a long, long time before. Why was that? Were they using up the other stuff they had, or what was the reason?
So it's still not entirely clear to me, because so we know that they're lying about the BLA status. So Peter Marks issued what called legal fake, that BLA, because they never complied with BLA standards, as we will discuss further on. I'm still not clear why they were doing this performance of shipping EUA labeled versus in Europe they were shipping Comirnaty all along. Maybe it was Pfizer being more paranoid about their own legal exposure than Peter Marks. Maybe that was some sort of a fight ongoing. But in any case, so they went on the market as EUA. They never complied with BLA. Peter Marks issued a fake BLA approval for sometime a year and a half afterwards, they were still shipping EUA. In some cases, they were actually for military. There's a whistleblower report. I believe we may have attached. I'm not sure if we have attached it. In any case, I've seen there was a legal case, Jane Doe versus Austin, and this was for military mandates. In that case, there were whistleblowers, 9 military service members that wrote up a report saying that DoD was shipping fake labeled Comirnaty, relabeled batches that were EUA batches, and we've traced them to VAERS data set, showing clearly that those were labeled EUA batches. DoD was simply just relabeling them into Comirnaty and shipping to military bases to overcome resistance of service members who knew that EUA products cannot be mandated.
Which is totally criminal. That's a criminal thing to do.
Yeah. But they were doing it. And we have, very good documentation as part of a lawsuit that this was happening during that time. After 2023, they just started, I guess, shipping Comirnaty. I'm not sure what guarantees they gave to Pfizer, but Pfizer started shipping Comirnaty in the US.
And all these people who got the shots from the EUA product while the vaccines were already approved as BLA, I mean, people had no idea. If you had, there was no knowledge about what was going on. I bet even the doctors had no clue.
Doctors have no idea. Doctors are the easiest ones to know on this because they have no idea of what I'm talking about. They have no idea how drugs are regulated. They have very limited idea about clinical trials. And they're just as on purpose, they're not educated about this. And they become, and they also train to be very arrogant, actually, and thinking that they're the smartest people out there. And that prevents them from trying to figure this out by themselves.
Right. In any case, I thought it was amazing that these products received this BLA approval such a long time ago. It's years ago. And that to this day, nobody sued the FDA over what they did, over giving these vaccines, so-called vaccines, the approval, the BLA approval, or doing a citizen petition. It's just, how do you explain that?
Well, frankly, I don't know. To some extent, this material, as I said, also relies on a lot of data that was FOIA'd. So it was, for a long time, it was probably not possible to do research and well-researched lawsuit like this. It wasn't possible to do maybe for the first 2 years or so until all the FOIA stuff that we've included here became available. And until we figured out exactly what they were doing. As I said, also, I was confused, just like everyone else was confused about this whole EUA business, because one of the reasons for it, and I believe this was intentionally called like that. So there are several regulatory pathways that exist today for new products to get on the market. There's a regulatory pathway that's called expanded access use. It's EAU. It's kind of hard to pronounce. Expanded access.
Yes, and it's very confusing because it's the same 3 letters, just in a different sequence. So it's easy to mix up EAU and EUA and...
So, and there's another one, which is a one-time use, which is also called emergency. So the EAU, most of the professionals call EUA just because it's easier to pronounce. Emergency use or EUA.
What?
No, seriously,
it's easier to pronounce.
This is how I got confused, And then there's another one, which is one-time use. Basically, you can apply for a one-time use, and it's also called emergency use, as a terminally ill person, some experimental procedure that has no other, doesn't have approvals. So there's a lot of confusion with this emergency use language. But eventually, I figured it out. I figured out that EUA and EAU are completely different things. And so EUA, everybody needs to understand, EUA is not a regulatory pathway at all. It's not anything to do with medicine. It doesn't have to do with any pharmaceutical. Like, the things that are designated EUA are explicitly taken out of the entire regulation of the FDA. None of the safety and efficacy applies to them. It's not medical. Informed consent is explicitly written into the US law that informed consent is not to be given with EUA. You only give information sheet. you don't give informed consent.
Exactly. And before maybe I'm going to show my this picture that I created from this analogy, because I think it makes the point in a very easily to grasp way. But before I share that, I wanted to just come back to what you said, that for 2 years, I asked you, why did it take so long? So many years have passed. And you said, well, it wasn't really possible before because we just didn't know. And we had to FOIA all the stuff that we now know. A lot of the stuff that you have in that is in the citizen petition is actually the result of FOIA requests. And who knows how often they had to sue. I mean, often you have to sue the government to actually get something back. And even then, you don't know how much is redacted and how much they hide from you. But this fact alone is absolutely damning. Because it means it was hidden. This whole thing was just hidden from the public obviously with intention.
Yeah. For sure. This is definitely showing the intent to deceive and intent to harm. And I've been saying this operation was intentional for a long time, but people wouldn't believe me. People tell me I'm a conspiracist or I am too, I don't know, alarmist or something. But this is the proof that this was intentional, because the regulations are clear. When you look through this petition, when you look through the relevant documents that FDA, for example, has since about 2012. I have a whole collection which Catherine Watt found. The whole collection of FDA materials, internal PowerPoints, and even PowerPoints that they have presented to the industry, like they have the industry day discussing BARDA and countermeasures. All of this material shows that they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew that countermeasures have nothing to do with medicine. They knew that no regulations apply to countermeasures. They knew that informed consent doesn't apply. In fact, in many slides, they're saying, we need this pathway, the EUA countermeasure pathway, because without it, we would be violating Food and Drugs and Cosmetics Act. And that's exactly what it's designed to do. It's designed to violate Food and Drugs and Cosmetics Act. It's designed to violate consumer safety safeguards that everybody expects, all the consumers expect. All the doctors think that if FDA says it's okay, it means it went through all of those things. And you can look at all the commentators and actually people who were even on the health freedom side, like propaganda outlets always harp on the fact that it went through this rigorous FDA phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, safety efficacy review and lot release and all that. And they will throw this whole thing at you. What you have to understand is for EUA, none of it applies. So that it exists in principle.
Exactly.
It just doesn't apply to these mRNA shots.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to pull up this picture and then you can explain it. Let me see. All right. So here we see a water main and we see a sewage pipe, and there are millions and millions of these sewage pipes and water mains in the United States.
Yeah.
And they never meet. I dare to say that there is not a single sewage pipe that ends up in a water main in the United States. They are, you see, they look like train tracks and they meet in infinity. So they never meet. They're always running, I don't know, above, below, parallel to each other, but they never mix. And for obvious reasons, they do not mix. And the EU, so this, the EUA pathway is like a sewage pipe. Because, it's emergency, world is coming to an end, everybody is going to die. So if everybody's going to die, people might be willing to try out something that is totally unproven, was just thrown together as a last-ditch effort because, everybody's going to die anyway. That's basically what it is.
Right.
As you said, it violates, nothing applies.
Regulations for purity and safety of drinking water are totally different from regulations that apply to sewage pipe, which just needs to be directed to a certain way and be away from the drinking water, right? But the drinking water has a whole bunch of standards that you need to comply with. Actually, I'm on the board of a consumer water company, and I know how many regulations you have to comply with to ensure that you're delivering safe drinking water.
Exactly. And what you see here explains to a great extent why life expectancy has increased so much during the end of the 19th century and then during the beginning of the 20th century, because people had clean drinking water, because before let's say 1850 or so, there was a lot of sewage in the drinking water. There was a lot of stuff that made you sick. And people in New York City, for example, New York City was a toxic place. So many people died of typhoid because of polluted water that they drank. So now I'm going to share I'm going to share the other one before we go into the petition itself. So what happened was, actually, I should add that the water main, that is like getting full BLA approval, and it doesn't mean that the water is absolutely safe. I mean, our drinking water isn't that great, but at least you don't die when you drink it. Which is not true for what's flowing in the sewage pipe. So now let's go to the other picture. All right. So sewage pipe is emergency use authorization. Water main is biologics license application approved. Now, what the FDA did is basically they said, all right, we are just going to give what's flowing in the sewage pipe. We are going to give it this coveted BLA thing. We are going to say, no, it's approved. It's like it has a biologics license. It's approved as if it were water that was cleaned and treated and all sorts of stuff before it got into somebody's house. So what they basically did is they capped the sewage pipe and said, oh, look, we are going to make it flow into the water main, and we just declare that it's you can drink it. There it is.
Yeah,
it's safe.
They essentially exactly what they did. They declared that those studies or whatever they did in December to put the EUA on the market, which, as I said, doesn't require any compliance with anything, are now sufficient to issue BLA in 2021. And I've made several analogies. Yeah, this is one of the analogies, but another analogy is, if you were pregnant and you got an abortion, you can't give birth to the same baby several months later. That's how it works. So they did not comply with BLA when they put this product on the market. Then they declared it approved, but the studies to get to comply with the BLA standards were never done. And this is what we outline in our petition.
Now, did they ask, before they gave it this BLA approval, did they ask Moderna and Pfizer to conduct additional studies and fulfill, do all the stuff that needed to be done in order to get the approval? Was there anything they demanded of them?
No. So the FDA never asked. So in principle, all the preclinical and clinical trials to comply with BLA needed to be redone. So if they really wanted to ultimately issue a BLA to this material, they should have required go back and redo all the preclinical and all the clinical trials now in the investigationally compliant manner. As we outline in our petition, that was never done. The studies that were submitted as part of EUA were full of fraud and manipulation, and we list how. But FDA didn't do that. They said, oh, well, there are some post-market commitments, which is different from go back and redo everything. They said, well, there are some post-market commitments, such as, studying pregnant women, which was never done, some children's studies and some additional population studies. Those are just extra additional questions, but you've never answered the main question either. And by the way, Pfizer never really complied with post-market commitments either, and neither did Moderna. They did not do a pregnancy study. They did not do any real studies in children. They have since been issuing additional versions based on tests in 8 mice. And, so this new mNEX spike from Moderna, I also have written about it. They, again, did not do any placebo-controlled studies. They didn't comply with anything. And FDA simply issued them a narrowed approval, but that narrowed approval is kind of smacks of eugenics. And I also wrote about it because it says now, well, healthy people don't need this dangerous product, but the unhealthy people will benefit from this dangerous product.
Yeah, let the unhealthy drink sewage, but the healthy ones, they can drink clean water.
Unhealthy ones drink sewage. You don't want to give it to a healthy child, right? But literally, it says. Yes. So they also put more. So FDA actually, in fact, did find the these products mislabeled because they issued these, remember, label corrections, labeling it for myocarditis now ultimately, right? So now it's labeled with a warning for myocarditis, and the narrowed prescription that FDA issued is for people with cardiovascular disease. Make it make sense. Okay.
Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. Unless you want to kill people, then
Yeah.
it makes sense. Now, if the FDA had asked Moderna and Pfizer to do all the stuff, basically they would have needed to ask them to start from scratch, because this EUA thing is just sewage.
Yeah.
You cannot use it for anything. So you have to start from scratch. You have to do everything. It would have taken years. It would have taken years. And obviously that did not happen. So it's clear just from the timeline,
Yeah.
and also, that none of these things happened. It was just a declaration. We take this product that was produced under EUA, and we now give it this sign of quality and approval, adherence to all the FDA regulations that is so coveted by the industry.